Today I'm going to talk about 2 reasons why Jesus' incarnation matters for you today. One reason you probably already know, but the second reason I'm guessing you probably didn't think about. Hello everyone, this is Theology 101 and my name is Andrew Kim. This channel exists to explain complex theological concepts in everyday language. If this is your first time watching this channel, please remember to subscribe and leave me a comment to let me know which topics you would like for me to cover in the future. Now let's jump into today's topic. Number 1, the first reason why Jesus became a man was in order to save us. Now I think you know this if you're a Christian, but I want to focus on Matthew chapter 2 to look at this a little more deeply. In Matthew chapter 2, we find out that although Jesus was born in Bethlehem, he was raised in Nazareth, and so the gospel writer Matthew explains the story of why this happened. We see that Joseph protects his family, particularly Jesus, and takes him to Egypt when Herod finds out about his birth, and Herod orders that all the baby boys in Bethlehem and the surrounding regions should be murdered. Now, on the surface, it just looks like Joseph is protecting his son's life by going to Egypt. But the gospel writer tells us that there was actually another reason why Joseph took Jesus to Egypt. In Matthew chapter 2, verse 15, it says, "This was to fulfill what the Lord has spoken by the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I called my son.'" Matthew is quoting Hosea chapter 11, verse 1. In that context, God is recounting his relationship with Israel and reminding them how he loved them as a father and he treated them as his son. Especially in the story of Exodus, we see an example of this when God takes them out of Egypt and frees them from slavery. And so you might be wondering, why is Matthew quoting a passage about God taking Israel out of Egypt when talking about Joseph bringing his son Jesus into Egypt? Good question. Now, one of the reasons why God created Israel as his nation, according to the Abrahamic covenant, was in order to make them a light to the nations. This means that he wanted Israel to be an example to the nations and to bring other nations to himself. Now, the problem was that Israel didn't obey. They fell into idolatry, and they weren't the light to the nations. In fact, in many cases, they resembled the nations. And so when Jesus comes on the scene, he comes as the king of Israel. He comes as their representative. And here Matthew is showing us that the reason why he has to go to Egypt and eventually come out of Egypt to escape death is so that he can fulfill the function of Israel, which is to be a light to the nations, to bring salvation to every person. So what we see is that Joseph took Jesus into Egypt in order to save his life so that Jesus can come out of Egypt to save ours. Now, I think you already know this first reason why Jesus became a man, in order to save us from our sins. That's one of the major tenets of Christianity. But there's a second reason why Jesus became a man that I think is a lesser known reason, and that is to comfort us. Now, when Herod heard the news that Jesus was born, he makes an order to kill every baby boy 2 years and under, because this is about how old Jesus would have been. He orders his soldiers to go to Bethlehem, to go to the surrounding regions, and they kill every single baby boy 2 years and under. Bethlehem had about 1,000 people, which we can calculate there were probably around 20 baby. But if you include the surrounding villages, this would increase to about 100 baby boys. Can you imagine 100 mothers, fathers, hundreds of brothers and sisters watching a baby boy, their baby brother or baby son being slaughtered? You can imagine the cries and the screams that happen from this one event. So with this dark backdrop, Matthew quotes a passage from the prophet Jeremiah. Matthew 2:17 through 18 says this: "Then was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping and loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more." Matthew quotes Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 15. And the context is that Jeremiah describes the scene when all the mothers of Israel are in Ramah and they're watching their sons become slaves to Babylon. In fact, Jeremiah was one of the person who ended up having to go to Babylon, and so he was an eyewitness to this event. And so he describes this event by saying that Rachel, from her tomb in Ramah, comes out and cries with the mothers of Israel. You need to remember who Rachel was. Rachel was the favorite wife of Jacob, who later becomes Israel. But for many years, Rachel couldn't have a son. And so she just watched with resentment her sister Leah having son after son until one day her pride and joy, Joseph, was finally born. But do you remember what happened to Joseph? Joseph was the favorite son of Israel. And so all the other brothers became jealous. So they sold him as a slave, and he ended up in Egypt. Rachel then believes that Joseph died from an animal, and she grieves her entire life for her son. In fact, when she gives birth to her second son, Benjamin, she dies giving birth. And so her whole life, she's never met her son Benjamin, and she's believed that her son Joseph has been dead. So when Jacob ends up burying Rachel in Ramah, that place became known as a place of sorrow, because you can imagine how much sorrow Rachel lived with. Well, Jeremiah says that is the same place where these mothers of Israel, watching their sons become slaves, and Rachel, figuratively speaking, comes out and cries with them. Now, why does Matthew quote this passage in Jeremiah, referring to Matthew chapter 2? Well, Ramah was only 5 miles north of Jerusalem. It was very close to Bethlehem. And so what Matthew is saying is that in the same way Rachel came out of her tomb to cry with the mothers of Israel when their sons became slaves to Babylon, she is also coming out of her tomb to cry with the mothers in Bethlehem who have lost their baby boys. And so the question is, what comfort can you give to grieving mothers after they have lost their son? This is what God says in the very next 2 verses in Jeremiah chapter 31, after describing the grief of the mothers of Israel watching their sons go to exile. Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 16 through 17. Thus says the Lord, keep your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for there is a reward for your work, declares the Lord, and they shall come back from the land of the enemy. There is hope for your future, declares the Lord, and your children shall come back to their own country. And so the comfort God gives is saying that one day you will see your sons again, mothers of Israel. But the fact is, in history, they never saw their sons again. Their sons went to Babylon. They ended up dying there. And Israel never returned back until 70 years later. And so how can God say this to comfort these grieving mothers? It is because of what God will say later in the same chapter in Jeremiah chapter 31, verses 33 to 34. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. This passage is talking about the new covenant, the new promise God gave to Israel, saying that one day he will forgive their sins, one day he will create a new people, one day he will place his kingdom on this earth. But in order for the new covenant to be inaugurated, we learn that Jesus says the night before his crucifixion, he takes a piece of bread saying, this is my body broken for you. He takes a cup of wine saying, this is the blood of the new covenant that's being shed for you. You see, the comfort that God is able to give to the grieving mothers of Israel and the grieving mothers in Bethlehem is this: there is a new covenant coming. There is a new kingdom coming. There is a new king who is coming. And in this kingdom, there will be no more tears. You never have to say goodbye to your baby boys. There's no more lunatic rulers who commit genocide. In this kingdom will be forgiveness, healing, and hope. Do you know what Matthew is saying in Matthew chapter 2 by quoting Jeremiah 31? He is saying that the day that all the grieving mothers have been waiting for has arrived. The day of the new covenant has arrived when this baby boy comes out of Egypt in order to go to the cross and inaugurate this covenant. Listen, God is not a distant God who doesn't sympathize with your weakness and your grieving. God understands those moments when we get depressed and feel hopeless. This is exactly why Jesus became a man. He became a man not just to save us from our sins. He became a man to comfort us in the face of death. You know, this passage has comforted me tremendously these past 3 years because my father passed away back in 2018. So although I may never see him in my life again, just like the mothers of Israel will never see their sons again in their lifetime, or the mothers in Bethlehem will never see their sons again in their lifetime, or Rachel never saw Joseph again in her lifetime, in the kingdom, they all saw their sons again. And in the kingdom, I will see my Father again. I hope that this passage can give you comfort, knowing that even if you had to say goodbye to loved ones, if they are in Christ, you will see them again in His kingdom. If you found this video helpful, please subscribe, leave a comment and let me know what you have learned or about any topics you would like for me to cover. Until next time, see you.